Our is quite a team behind the scenes, and you'll get to know them over the coming weeks and months. Um, and I'll just very briefly mention a number of names. Nina, our working on the operations, Herman working on the knowledge management, Riti, you'll get to know her in a moment. Alex is my co-lead from Vasafiri. Tosa is the brains behind the technical training side. Let's see, who else do we have here? Gareth, he's the one who started off all the connections in Kenya. Carlo, he's the one who backs us up all in all kinds of contents work. Kate, she helps us a lot on the systems leadership side. And let's see, am I missing anybody here? Dennis, our communications lead. Just check me if I've got any missing. Anna, who's helping us on the backstopping with a lot of the work. So you see, there's a lot of thought and a lot of love going into getting you together and making this food shelf fellowship possible. I'm grateful for you that you're willing to take this first step in the fellowship, because in the midst of very professional lives and professional commitments, and facing all of the extra personal and professional challenges that the COVID pandemic confronts you with, you have committed your time to this leadership program. And it's one of the illustrations of how you, the first 30 fellows of our food systems leadership program, are passionate to be pushing for some real change, structural, significant, and practical progress towards bold ambitions. We as the initiators, that means Wageningen University in Research and Vasafiri Consulting, both of us globally leading institutes in food systems and in systems change, we share these ambitions. They lie at the heart of all that we do too, and they drive us to do our work excellently, because the questions are large and they need the best of us. So the African Food Fellowship that you're now joining is about changing food systems in a particular direction. We're not agnostic. It's about making sure that they deliver on the ambitions that are captured in the things such as the SDGs and the Malabo Declaration, which already 7 years ago in 2014 was referring to, and I quote, transforming Africa's agriculture for shared prosperity and improved livelihoods through inclusive growth and sustainable development. So, those ambitions are there. They have been there for a long time. And those ambitions, they give the direction to our journey. It isn't simply about any kind of change. It's about changing food systems so that they are set up to provide healthy diets, flourishing livelihoods for everybody involved, and to do so in a way that takes care of the planet we all depend on. Big words. In practice, it just translates to the work that you do, making more fish and vegetables available more affordably so everyone can improve their diets, providing appropriate finance to informal markets so that SMEs and farmers can invest affordably, and creating new business models for new ways of sharing risks and rewards in a fairer and more stable manner. Bold ambitions alone, though, they're not going to get us to where we want to go. I mean, after all, we know an enormous amount about the problems we must help resolve, such as the structural vulnerability of millions, the growing triple burdens of malnutrition, malnourishment, obesity, and the ongoing degradation of our natural environment. We know about many promising ways forward, and we know many dead ends that lie at the end of the choices that we continue to make now. So, despite the pledges made in 2014, currently only 4 countries, which unfortunately does not yet include Kenya, live up to their promise. We therefore need to make different choices and to be steadfast in acting on those choices. To get to transform food systems needs rethought and renewed leadership. Leadership that has 3 roles, your roles, pointing to why change is needed, making it urgent, prioritizing what needs changing, and knowing how to change food systems. Africa's emerging leaders, you are a critical continental resource. And that is why the African Food Fellowship focuses on supporting Africa's emerging leaders. Because your and broader emerging leadership can accelerate Africa towards the positive outcomes that we all desire. The African Food Fellowship is not alone in these ambitions. Many others are working hard in a similar journey. You are working hard in this with the fishing groups you lead, the NGOs you set up, the inclusive agribusinesses you have started. And our approach is collaborative. We seek to amplify successful efforts by others working towards across the food system by supporting the leadership within those efforts. What we bring to the party is threefold: a world-class food systems leadership program, incubation support for emerging initiatives by our fellows, and a curated network that actively supports your efforts and those of all our future fellows. So that's what's coming from our side, and we're really looking forward to you also sitting forward, stepping forward, and actively engaging and making this a fellowship and a learning program of us all. It's an unknown journey in many ways. A year ago, we didn't know we would be here with the likes of you. In this next phase, it starts here. And the food systems leadership understanding, the skills and connections that you build will serve you for a lifetime. And what we learn together will benefit our planned first expansion to Rwanda. That's your first inspiration role. Our intention is to continue this journey for at least a decade and become active in many countries. And eventually, this and you will then be the first group can grow into a continental fellowship of influence. So from all these lofty ideas, let's come back down to earth, because change happens through the choices that you and your colleagues, your associates, your peers make every day in the food systems areas that you work in. We're starting in Kenya with agriculture, digital agri-finance, and SMEs focusing on horticulture. Impact areas that will differ in every country, and they'll differ over time. So these are local food systems that are essential for the goals that I have spoken of and where you are already active. Beyond all of these stories, above all, we want you to be inspired. We look forward to you inspiring others. We want you to have fun, because it is fun working with a great group of people on meaningful stuff. We want to improve you to improve your professional opportunities. And finally, we hope we can help you feel emboldened to make positive change happen. So, Eunice, will you and our fellows now introduce us to the impact areas that we are focusing on?
Fantastic. So just to touch a little bit and expand on what Joost spoke on the impact areas. So in Kenya, we selected 3 impact areas, one being Agri Finance, that includes all associated services around finance, such as insurance and also digital solutions. We also chose horticulture and aquaculture. If you are active in Kenya, you know that this doesn't come as a surprise as why we selected these 3 impact areas, especially coming off this high peak of COVID and looking at the disruptions that it has had in the food systems, as well as the potential and opportunities where we have seen microsystems thriving despite the pandemic. So these impact areas are subsystems, and we see them as leveraging points where we hope that while we work on these impact areas, they'll provide hope and they'll connect different networks, and the fellows together will be able to transform one part of the food ecosystem that would have multiplier effects. So we have digital finance, we have horticulture, we have aquaculture. And I think it's best to hear from the fellows directly in terms of their motivations and their passion and drive to transform these impact areas. So just looking to see who's on the call. So I will select Eric Ogello. So I know, Eric, you're in aquaculture. Kindly, if you could change one thing in aquaculture, what would you do? And in your opinion, what positive effect do you think it would have on the food system? Eric, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to join this program. Yes, indeed, I'm in agriculture field, and one of the things that I will wish to change or to see change in agriculture is a significant reduction in post-harvest losses and enhanced production, because this is at the basic foundation in aquaculture sector. What we have seen is that a lot of fish is produced, but along the chain, a significant proportion of that production goes to waste and therefore does not contribute to the economic and national income. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Then we'll look at Agri Finance. And when we look at Agri Finance, we have seen with the movement and other mobility distractions and disruptions within the supply chain, digital finance has really skyrocketed in Kenya. I think for years, we have enjoyed the privilege of M-Pesa and the impact that it has had across multiple sectors. But when we look at agriculture and when we look at food systems in particular, digital finance and innovations in that space are really the next frontier when we look at Agri Finance. So here I will select Grace Njoroge. So Grace, you are one of our selected fellows who has a specialty in digital Agri Finance and looking at microfinance related solutions. So Grace, tell us, where did you develop this motivation and where do you see it going while working on the fellowship and with the fellowship?
Thanks, Eunice. Everyone, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Grace Njoroge, and to answer your question, Eunice, yes, digital innovations are quite rampant in Africa, specifically in Kenya, where with M-Pesa being founded in 2007, there's been quite a large uptake of those services. However, when you look at financial inclusion statistics, this differ quite differently between the urban and the rural areas. And so you find that the rural areas, the uptake is low, the coverage is low, the usage of digital innovations is low, which also translates also to uptake usage of financial services like credit, savings, insurance. And yet these are the people in the rural areas who really need these services, especially if we are going to be securing our food systems. We need them to produce more. We need, as we just had, post-harvest losses to be reduced. So we need them to be able to store their food, take it to the market quite easily. And so for me, the motivation was having worked sector, seeing a lot of this disjointedness in the various sectors, in the various actors who are in the sector. And so you find that there's a lot of information that can be leveraged to provide finance to these rural actors in the sector. But this information is very disjointed. People are not talking to each other. And if people could just talk to each other, then there could be better products developed for the segment, as well as better usage, better uptake, as well as better, not only financial services, but also non-financial services that have been proven to help these actors not only take the product, but also be able to utilize this product and increase their produce.
Fantastic, thanks, Grace. We're looking forward to following up on some of those proposals that you have made during the fellowship. So I would turn now our face to horticulture. And in horticulture, I mean, we have seen massive proposals, changes in policy, etc., that have come up post-COVID. We know that COVID really amplified nutrition and the need to sync both food security and nutrition for agricultural transformation. So my question is to you, Teleboit. In your opinion, what is stopping this from happening? Why are we not seeing more noise and more voices from horticulture speaking on this particular issue? Yeah, over to you, Tele. Tell us more. Okay, I think Tele either I cannot hear him. Can anybody else hear him? No. Okay, so I will just pick someone else to speak on his behalf from horticulture. Okay, great. Elizabeth, all the way in Nakuru. You've mentioned your specialty is looking at sustainable consumption and production. Could you tell us a little bit about what are some of the changes that you're looking forward to bringing about when you push for these propositions to happen?
Okay, thank you very much. To answer your question, I'd say one, if you look at the current production systems for the smallholder farmers, there are quite some challenges which are faced by the smallholder farmers. One being the low adoption of sustainable consumption and production practices. By this, I mean, you look at the farmers currently producing, they are not looking into issues of how much they are extracting from the natural resources. So for me, it is promoting the adoption of sustainable consumption and production, where farmers are going to maximize on their production, while at the same time reducing on the negative impacts which comes along when you undertake their production. Things to do with the soils we are using, the water we are using, the pesticides we are using, even the people we are using along the value chain. So for me, I'm looking forward to co-creating solutions, exchanging ideas, which are going to impact positively, mainly on our smallholder farmers. Our smallholder farmers, if you look at the value chains they are undertaking, especially in horticulture and the rest, it is quite unregulated. There are issues to do with the policy. There are issues to do with even the access to finance, which is going to access to finance and markets, which are going to enhance their production. Because we cannot talk about continuous and sustainable production without having finance, without having markets, and without having the knowledge on the production and consumption bit. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Elizabeth, I really liked your answer because as you went through, you talked about elements that Eric picked up in aquaculture, also gaps that Grace picked up in finance, and now in horticulture, and we see the full circle. We see systems and we see our impact areas being interlinked, and that is what we are actually striving for. I would like to tell the other members on the call, none of these questions were asked in advance. So it's just random selection. And just to give you a taste and a flavor of the fellows that we have on board, we have people who are working in different areas within the impact areas that they have selected at different levels and interlinked. And I'm happy that with time and with different courses, we'll see opportunities for people to work together and to develop these impact areas further. I think that's it from me on my end. I know we have our guest speakers who have joined the call, so I'll hand it over to Joost, and let's have these two inspiring leaders talk to.
So Louisa, let me start with you. I'm just following alphabetical order here, L and then M. So the first question, the question that for me is of the many things that you could talk about is, so where do you see some of the key needs for transformation in food systems within Africa particularly, and what's the role of leadership in contributing to that transformation? Where do you see the gaps and what's happening in terms of positive leadership that we can connect to?
Okay, let me indeed apologize for not being able to be there longer. And that is indeed a matter of leadership, because I'm going to join Agnes Kalibata, who you know by name, who is the special envoy for the Food System Summit. And I cannot miss meeting with her. So you will understand that's my absolute priority. So food system transformation, it's really the buzzword of the year, I think. And I'm going to say a couple of things that may provoke you into further thinking for the rest of the time. The traditional or classical way to look at food system transformation in Africa is to say, okay, here we have all these small farmers and they're having a difficult time. They need to have some access to irrigation water, perhaps. They need to have better markets, a little bit of credit. But basically to think about incremental changes. Now, you could also look at it from a very different point of view. And I'm not saying that one is better and the other is not good, but definitely there is another view. And that is that labor is going to be a scarce factor in Africa. Not because there are not enough people. We know very well there will be 4 billion people at the end of this century, but many people will actually move to cities and do other things, move out of agriculture, maybe move a little bit into agriculture transformation in the sense of processing, but most people will not work in agriculture. That's very logical. This has happened everywhere from Asia to Europe to the US. So labor will be more scarce, and in some parts of Africa, it is already scarce. And if you want to keep labor, the wages have to go up. So productivity of agriculture has to go up. So one way or other, we need to go to systems that are both efficient in terms of resource use, soils, water, fertilizer, you name it, crop protection, but also in terms of labor. And that requires really also leadership. It might very well be that in 50 years' time, we will be talking about the massive transformation of Africa in terms of robotization. It may be very well that we're talking about Africa being one huge garden for the world where intensive horticulture is going to be the key issue. So I want to provoke you, and again, I think this is a matter of leadership, to think back from the end of the century when there will be 4 billion people, or if that's too difficult, back from 2050, and look towards now. What is the kind of African agriculture that we want? And I bet you that's not going to be only a small scale farming situation where only or mainly women are working. It's also not a situation where we have these little changes. There will be radical changes. And we can already see some of that. There are several countries in Africa, for example, that have taken the lead on looking again at genetic modification, or at least at genetic editing or gene editing in CRISPR-Cas. There are other areas where there is a lot of work in terms of thinking about new systems for water supply. The advent of electrical power through solar energy will really massively help irrigation. And I cannot repeat, and then I'll stop and give Marty a chance to mow me away if necessary. Let me repeat that in Africa, south of the Sahara, 4% of the area is irrigated. In China, it's 40%. In India, it's about the same. There's so much more that can be done with the huge supply of water that we have in Africa, with the Great Lakes, with the great rivers. And we will be able to do that because electricity in 20, 30 years' time will be much cheaper than today. So we must plan, we must have that leadership vision for the future and plan for the positive changes that are about. Taking into account, obviously, the limitations of climate, the need to maintain biodiversity of the beautiful African forests, and so on. Well, this is my shortest Joost I can do on this issue. So let me leave it here.
I'm impressed. You managed to get in 5 key points in 5 minutes. Thank you. Martin, you want to pick up the pick it up from here, and then perhaps you can, as you do that, end off and throw back something at Louise and say, hey, Louisa, I see this the same or differently.
Thank you, Joost and Eunice, and all colleagues on this call. Louise, thanks for sparking this little intervention that you and I have. But also for me to just express my deep sense of gratitude on behalf of Wasafiri when I was invited by Kate and to look at what you guys are going to go through. I couldn't help but just have admiration and hope. Hope that there are young people, young because I'm 57, then I earn the right to call most people young. Young people getting involved in what is the basic element of what it means to measure progress or lack of it. And if we seriously look at our aspiration as a continent, in order to begin to resolve all the challenges we confront, you are in the sector that is at the heart of it, the soil. Whether we are talking about aquaculture or horticulture or agriculture in general or finance, you are at the heart of it all. If we begin to redefine our relationship with soil, we may just begin to understand all the other elements. So I'm looking at leaders like you, not only because there is agric next to your name, next to your title, but also because you might just begin to crack the wisdom that we need as a continent to surge forward. I would cry and withdraw my earlier statement if agriculture for you simply means copying what the Western world has done, imitating the massive production that they have managed to do over time, and they have sold to us for a long period of time. We need to rethink and redefine that. That's the beauty of this class you have. It's to begin to sit down and say, Africa, after 401 years of slavery, colonialism, are you going to stop and begin to think by yourself and not to define economics and competition and success, which is measured on one little individual? If I show numbers that are growing all the time, I'm successful. That is not how we count success. If our aspiration is to be where the Western world is, God forbid. They have to begin now to inquire whether that is the right way, whether it's in agriculture or anything, talk about anything. I'm grateful I live here in England, but I also know how fractured society here is, how people are separated from soil. And you are having that opportunity to redefine that. If, guys, the economics and agriculture you learn is just what we are coming from, God help us. But I also have confidence just because I listened to the people that began to speak. There is hope in there. In the voice you hear the linkage between the ecological divide, the need to bridge the ecological divide with the social divide and the well-being divide. That gave me a good sense. That gave me hope. But it requires a lot of deep thinking, but also sometimes the kind of candidness and honesty that we have not always exercised as an African continent. We need that. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both for, well, before I get involved, perhaps let me give you the opportunity to say, hey, I heard something from the other, which I would like to pose a question on. Do you have something that you would like to ask each other or at the moment?
Shall I raise something, Martin? I'm very much in agreement when you say Africa shouldn't copy the West. And I hope everybody understands that that is not at all what I tried to imply. But I would go further and I would say Africa should combine the elements that they have that are useful, that we know have worked, and at the same time use the best lessons learned elsewhere in the entire world. Chinese agriculture has many examples to give, because in fact it also started with a completely different political history, but very much also with smallholder farming. And we shouldn't oppose smallholding and big holdings, but I think learning the lessons gives you a head start, and a good leader knows when to choose the right lessons and how to adapt them and apply them and always translate them. So I think this is very much also where I think our future leaders, and you said this so very eloquently, you are also very lucky that you are here today, because there are so many good lessons of experiences that are there for you to grasp. And that's a wonderful feeling. It is indeed a time of optimism. So it's wonderful to be young. I earned that right also to call you young, because I'm even older than Martin. So enjoy the fact that you're young and that you are also, because of the internet and all kinds of things, actually in touch with all the best experiences in food and agriculture in the world.
Thanks, Louise. And I just wanted to ask Louise, when we look at the data that projects the movement of people, 4 billion, most of them living in urban areas. When we have the lack of meeting and learning from the scholars that are on this journey, what would you say? Should they take that as a given, or should they even start questioning, how can we reconfigure that? Because it's not a God-given event. That's what we are projecting. Leadership can intervene, and we could end up with a different. Should they take it as a given, or they could say, this is what is projected? Is there any form of intervention they can do in order not to put pressure on either the cities or the production of the different foods that the cities will need?
It's a very good question, to what extent leaders can intervene. And we know, of course, many horrible examples where leaders have intervened in demographic movements. So it's usually very, very difficult in the longer term to get people back to where leaders want them to be. Closing borders or giving permits for people to travel always have led to a lot of upheaval socially and politically. So I think ultimately you want responsible leadership. And that means saying to the people, look, these are the projections. This is a collective problem. It's not just one country, but it's the whole of Africa. This is a collective problem. Why are people moving? We need to look at that, but probably because they're looking for better opportunities. This is also why migration, inter-country migration takes place. So are we not giving them the best opportunities in our country? And then the intervention, rather than being a sort of tight intervention from the top down with all the difficulties you have with that, could be, well, let's invest in better jobs. Let's invest also in better jobs in the rural areas. And I think that would be a kind of leadership where intervention, but then in a mild form, would actually be something that you should probably consider.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. And also for me, an intervention could include having genuine dialogue with communities, not leaders pretending they have answers, because we know they don't have. Regardless of how they come across with clarity, policy statements, it's all manufactured. None of us knows. The only solution possibly lies in genuine dialogue with communities. And we begin to hear what is coming out of there and then experiment a new way. I am just suspecting that when one strong paradigm of thought is communicated, it becomes as if it is an act of God. Actually, no, it's an act of human behavior and human decision. And actually, if people sat together, they might just do something different. I have the fortune of teaching at MIT a program called Values-Based Banking. And I'm working with small challenger banks that are claiming money doesn't have to be used this way. And they are prototyping their way of how to create patient money. When you deal with the soil, which has its own way in which it brings forth the food products that we need in order to survive and be healthy, you need to be slightly as patient as the soil is. And they are showing us a sign that it's possible to be profitable, not outrageously profitable, but profitable enough to cause regeneration. And yet, when we look at the big banks of this world, HSBCs and all the rest, you think there is only one narrative, that money has to give birth in 24 hours. And if we believe that paradigm, investment in agriculture will always pander to this situation that has just been created and make believe. And children who are studying economics now think that's the truth and probably the only truth.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you raise that. I think good leadership also always means listening to your environment first. And that's people, but that's also in a way listening to the soil, listening to natural resources. And the other thing, which I really want to, if there's one message I want to give you guys up there on my screen, that is the best decision-making politically or as a leader is by trying to get as many of the facts. And facts are not only statistics, but facts are the best possible approximation of how you see the world at that time, including the differences of opinion, including the uncertainties and so on. But in order to be acceptable as a leader and in order to be guided also in the right direction, it is important to have the facts. And it is important, therefore, to build up a good relationship with institutes of higher learning, whether it is in your own country or elsewhere, or MIT and so on. It is important to have yourself be driven by the facts, but the facts are not an excuse to make a choice.
I love that. The facts are not an excuse. Thank you, Louise, for underscoring that. Allow me to just latch on what you have said, but also to remember that facts are not only those things that appeal to what is above our shoulders, our brain. Now we are learning from other sciences, particularly neuroscience and other human sciences, that we humans don't simply think with our brain. Our traditions have always known that that little thing which is on the left side of our chest, the heart, is a faculty of thought. We need to widen our capacity for what thinking is. My grandmother still has a feel, not a thought, on why she must plant here and not there. If we ignore that, we are gone. Humans are not just thinking beings, but they are also beings in their totality. Leaders like you need to switch on all faculties of intelligence. Open mind, open heart. If we just listen to one line, that doesn't do. We need to feel our way through the development we need as a society. To do that, we need to suspend the traditional voices we have, which is the voice of judgment, sometimes cynicism, and fear to experiment our way to the new. And what I'm trying to emphasize here, as you do this, I invite you, I implore you, take in all the knowledge, all the facts, all the data, but also go back to your villages and see how they have survived over all these years. And learn. There is some little wisdom that needs to be amplified there. The fact that we can press a button and connect the 40 of us in one call doesn't mean that we know how to crack the challenges of life. Let's include in our search what wealth means in an African context. It is just not because there is a fat account in the bank. That is important, but not sufficient. What else is going to teach us about how to deal with pests and pesticides and everything that is around us? That's all I'm inviting. That's the privilege I'm looking at you have. You can help us redefine the future. Yes, agriculture is the entry point, but what you learn will be so applicable in everything else. And from Wasafiri's point of view, that's what we bring, systems thinking around everything we do. Therefore, I talked about ecological divide. We need to bridge that. Social divide, we need to bridge that. Certainly, well-being is an issue. We are currently in a storm of something when we cross the line of the ecological divide, and we are now in a situation where we are. In Kenya, you have the long history of land being so scarce. You can't define agriculture if you are not willing to look at your historical challenges around land and the deprivation that come out of it. Thank you.
Louise, thank you. And Martin, do I hear you wanting to step in still? Because you've got 5 minutes, I believe, before you have to step out.
Yes, if I may, because I was going to.
This is such a fascinating rant, and I think it's exactly the kind of leadership demonstration that is the most illustrative to our fellows. Please make use of your time still.
Well, I was going to challenge Martin a little bit on this dichotomy in a way, or complementarity is a better word, between feeling and or the brain and the heart, the feeling and rationality. Absolutely, feelings have to be taken seriously. And I know that a lot of farmers have perhaps intuitions or intuitive knowledge about doing things. But again, feelings in themselves for us as scientists also need some testing. And I think it's very good to be able to ask the questions and to see what the feelings are based on. And very often, but not always, feelings are in fact rooted in some very long-standing practices. But in today's age, I would also like to warn for taking feelings in an absolute sense. If you ask me what worries me most, well, there are many things that worry me, and one thing that really worries me is the growing polarization in our societies, in the world as a whole. And that's often a matter of polarization of feelings. Feelings may dress up as so-called scientific opinions, but the emotion is in the feelings. And so I think it's a task of a leader to hear the feelings, to examine them from all sides, but also to have the courage, and we haven't used this word yet, but courage is absolutely essential to leadership, to have the courage to say, I respect your feeling, however, it cannot be a basis for my decision-making. And it's very difficult, but very important that you see this difference.
Louisa, for me, actually, feelings are data. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just that the education system that most people went through, particularly the Western type, it kicked out feelings. It's like we are non-feeling beings. And yet, most of the people who are working for institutions, the beginning of those institutions was feeling. And then they employed people like you and Louisa who have gone to school to start now exploring their feelings with the data that we are used to. And if you check histories of institutions we celebrate, they were not a function of thoughts processing by themselves. It was an individual, maybe with another, attending to a feeling. And then they exploit more. Then they start inviting people to help them now put that into a context that others can understand. I agree with you, Louisa, they are not inseparable. But I also want to acknowledge that we are coming from a history where feelings were not part of decision making. I've had the fortune of working in government. I've had the fortune of working in business. I've had the fortune of working for international development. Feelings have been relegated to the backyard garden, and they could be responsible for many, including when Barings Bank collapsed. Many of the leaders in the bank had a feeling the way Neil Eason was playing the game was not right. But when they looked at the data, he was scoring every point by which trading of the type he was doing should be allowed. And a few months later, it wasn't just Neil Eason who lost the job, the entire Barings Bank. And then people say, I should have said, but how could I say to my colleagues that I had this nasty feeling inside me? All I am saying, Louisa, is that we don't ignore feelings. They are data.
Okay, I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely.
I bring it together. I do hear you. They are not the complete fact, but they are also not just something we should throw out.
No, they are complementary. But the question is that you should be able to look at them also in a dispassionate way, so that you understand where feelings come from. Sometimes feelings occur because people are afraid, for example, of modern technology and agriculture. And we should understand that fear, understand where it comes from, and then decide to act or not to act. But if you don't understand it and the fear is there like a big elephant in a room, we cannot move forward. So the courage is very important. And I saw a comment just coming by in the chat. It is about courage, and it is about exploring the history. Histories are very different, and yet at the human level, they also can be quite similar. And it's again, a leader is a person who can make the distinction between fact and emotion, and not rating one for the other, but also between what is relevant in a history, what is individual, what is collective, and has the courage to act. So it's distinction and courage that are very, very important parts of being a leader, whether it's in agriculture, as you say, or elsewhere.
And colleagues, just to add on to what Louisa said, if I was to put in a slight definition of leadership, that odd leadership of one lone ranger who is gifted, talented, thinking and acting and making decisions is gone.
Yeah.
No one good person is good enough to help us crack where to go to. What is the currency now? Collective leadership. Invest in the capacity to have skills of what it means to be collective in leadership. There isn't one good gifted person out there. And if you have that in your mind, I beg you, check it out. It won't get us anywhere. We have invested in that all the time. We get, and that's why for me this scholarship is critical, because it's bringing peers together and helping them to learn how to crack intractable challenges together. The first time I went to Chaos Corona, my system was shocked because I found that students were writing their master's thesis in groups. And I said, guys, how can this work? And then someone challenged me and said, Martin, apart from passing exams, everything else we do it in collective. People don't learn how to collaborate. Louisa, I know you may have to leave.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to go to Agnes. Good luck to you all. Thanks, Martin. It was great to have a chat with you. As always, we're very complimentary. Joost, thank you for your leadership, and all of you, enjoy. It's going to be wonderful. Be critical, ask all the questions. There is no question that cannot be asked. And we are there with you, and we wish you all the best. And Joost, when you guys need me again, thank you so much. Really great to speak to you.
Thank you for joining
Ciao,
us.
ciao.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Great, Martin. So thank you. You're still here. This is how then reality goes. I actually had a different plan for this particular session, but it was such a fascinating conversation and so rich for everybody. I let reality overtake my planning. And I think that's also part about being a leader and saying, this is an opportunity that we have to make use of. So we now have still 15 minutes with you, Martin, for some chats. And Yunus is going to be switching over here. I just wanted to pick up a couple of things that I noticed that really strikes me. And I think it comes also to the core of what we want with the African Food Fellowship. Both you, Martin, and both Louisa, you're very much about hope, about vision and hope. And hope is different from wishful thinking. And the Food Fellowship is very much about saying, so hope is about focusing on evidence-based possibility. And that evidence, as you discussed, is both the mind and the heart. What's the evidence from different levels, from different people, from different societies? And what are the possibilities that are informed by that about which we should then be choosing for? And that's what I think we also, the leadership is very much about a leadership of hope, about making clear what choices we can make and not getting stuck in all the choices that we shouldn't make. Because telling 150 ways not to do something doesn't help in actually telling the one way that you need to do something properly.